right, I think we'll get started. A very warm welcome to you all. We are welcoming people from HKBU, from our sister institutions in Hong Kong, and also scholars and practitioners from around the world, including from India. And this is just wonderful. My name is Meta Yort, and I'm the Dean of Arts here at Hong Kong Baptist University. Please forgive my masked presence here on screen. We have 3 people here in the control room, myself, Felix Wang, and also Professor John Vincenberg, who's our Associate Dean of Research. Let me say a few words about the context for this particular workshop. The Faculty of Arts at HKBU aims to cultivate new approaches to practice as research among its creative researchers. And to do this, we are inaugurating a workshop series that focuses specifically on practice as research. And that workshop series will feature prominent guests who work across disciplines and national boundaries. This is our inaugural workshop, and we're absolutely delighted to welcome scholar-practitioner Professor Tejaswini Niranjana of Lingnan University. Her workshop will focus on her experience in practice as research through her work with vocal musicians, a filmmaker, architects, and an exhibition designer in 3 different projects over the past 15 years. Professor Niranjana has accomplished a lot over many decades, so I'm just going to pull out some of the highlights. She is currently Professor and Head of the Department of Cultural Studies at Lingnan University, and at Lingnan University, she is also the Director of the Center for Cultural Research and Development. She is the co-founder of the Center for the Study of Culture and Society in Bangalore, which offered an innovative interdisciplinary PhD program from 2000 to 2012. Her monographs include Mobilizing India, Women, Music and Migration Between India and Trinidad, and that was published in 2006, and also Musicophilia in Mumbai, Performing Subjects and the Metropolitan Unconscious, which was published in 2020. And both of those monographs were published by Duke University Press. Professor Niranjana has also edited a number of volumes, and amongst these is Music, Modernity and Publicness in India, and that was published by Oxford University Press in 2020. Professor Niranjana is co-producer of 3 documentary films relating to music, and she is the curator of the Sat Music Collaboration Project. Professor Niranjana, Teju, it's such a delight to have you with us. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. We're going to hand things over to you, and then once you have presented your materials, Professor Vincenberg will take over and moderate the Q&A. So again, welcome to you all, and a very warm welcome to you, Teju. Teju, can you unmute yourself, please?
Thank you, Meta. Thank you, John. Thanks to all the friends at Baptist who I know are here. Sometimes it's a little alarming to speak in front of an unknown audience. And I am alarmed to find so many people I know and admire in this group. So forgive me if you've heard some of this before, or it's something that you didn't come here to listen to and expected something else. Just treat this as something I'm doing for an unknown audience. But I think that I haven't really spoken about my last project, my current project, in any formal sense anywhere. So this is going to be the first chance I'm having to do that. And thank you again, Meta and John Ernie, for having hosted me earlier in actually putting together, a collaborative event where Chow Yu Fai from your own university, Ip Kim Ho and Joyce Tang, musicians, we all 4 of us presented how we think about practice or riyaz in Hindustani. So let me jump in here and start talking about the 3 projects. I am a little alarmed also, not just because there are known people in the audience, but because I'm billed as a scholar practitioner. Sometimes I think maybe I'm here under false pretenses. I have no idea. Why am I a practitioner? I know that Meta and John have and others have heard me singing Hindustani music, but I am not really a practitioner in the sense of being someone who lives by that practice or is an accomplished performer. I'm merely an amateur. Okay, but I'm thinking, what is my practice? And I think that maybe a more appropriate practice to place me in is that of curation. So I'll say more about that a bit later. uh, After you invited me to speak on this occasion, I began to wonder how to talk about practice, not in any simplistic sense as the opposite of theory, which is our commonsensical way of understanding it. And I really don't know if I can, throw new light on that particular binary that we keep coming up against, especially in academia. Practice is one of those terms that encompasses a huge range of meanings in contemporary English, and I don't have to tell you this. But in the Baptist University context into which I've been invited, I imagine it refers to creative practice in the performing and visual arts. Because that is the hosting location, I will stay with this somewhat narrow definition of practice for the time being. It's also opportunistic because it helps me to speak about the kinds of things I've been doing with filmmakers and others and musicians over the last few years. So, one of my inspirations in my reflections on the relationships between research and practice is the UK based scholar Irit Rogoff, who has launched a series of curatorial interventions in Europe. I suspect that if I hadn't been living in Hong Kong these last few years, I would not have been able to understand what she is working against. Rogoff has the voice to rage against the British and European system of educational assessment that has unfortunately been rigidly followed in Hong Kong. This mode of educational assessment has to do with clearly measurable outcomes, even in the humanities and the arts, so called transferable skills, academic straitjackets of various kinds, constraints on research methods that have to be quantifiable and verifiable. Yes, and again, just speaking in Rogoff's voice, I can just say, as she suggests, the turn towards practice as research may help us to refocus on invention and speculation rather than proof and verification. So, with that inspiration, let me go forward. Rogoff does speak about multivalent research, and I suggest that for my context here today, in terms of what I'm talking about, I'd like to call it multimodal research instead. This refers both to how the research is done and how its findings are presented. So, for me, research is a process by which you constitute your object. And this process, in its multimodal aspect, is interwoven, in my case, with creative practice. So, let me speak about three examples of how the research object was produced through creative practice of different kinds. In each of these instances, I was not the one actually singing or composing or making music, although I was involved in these activities to some extent. I think that the idea of the individual creative genius really crumbles or comes apart in the music studio when everyone there in the group, whether it's popular music or more classical versions, everyone is involved in the decisions about what kind the composition should sound like and what the lyrics should be like. So I wasn't the one actually singing or recording, but I was helping to write the lyrics or helping to make the musical composition. My main practice, as I've mentioned before, is much closer to curation. All the three examples I'm speaking about involve collaborative engagements between practitioners, and these engagements I both enabled and led. So, my first example is about research led practice that became, in the end, practice led research. This is my project in the Caribbean. The book was called Mobilizing India, Women, Music and Migration Between India and Trinidad. So let me tell you a little bit about it before I play you a clip from the film that we made. The research began as an attempt to throw light on Indian questions about national identity and cultural practice, about femininity and masculinity, basically about gendering in colonial and post-colonial times. I had been exploring these issues for some time through analyzing literature and popular cinema in India. Through a series of serendipitous occurrences, I ended up as a frequent visitor to Jamaica and Trinidad in the 1990s. And I realized that my questions took on a new resonance when I situated them in the West Indies. Citing your questions elsewhere, like take an Indian question, place it in the West Indies, is a way of researching your own formation. And that's what I ended up doing. So eventually, the book became one about the making of the modern Indian in a place that was not geographically in the subcontinent at all. This had to do with what I called the Subaltern Diaspora, the indentured labor migration to the Caribbean and other places during the British Empire from the mid 19th century onwards, and the mingling of South Asian subcontinental people with the African ex slaves, the Afro Saxons. To cut a long story short, I became fascinated with the Trinidadian East Indian woman who sang calypso and ended up looking at the entire terrain of music making in the West Indies. I had nearly finished writing the book based on 10 years of research when, again, through serendipity, I met a famous rock pop singer in India who loved Caribbean music. His name was Remo Fernandez. I embarked on a filmmaking project with the director Surabhi Sharma, and that film, Jahaji Music, India and the Caribbean, changed my writing. Because after I did field work with a film crew, especially a film crew from India, in a place where Bollywood is pretty well known, I was able to gather more material for my research than I had been able to do in 10 years of field trips to the Caribbean. All the researchers in the audience should laugh a hollow laugh. Unfortunately, on Zoom, one can't hear everyone, but I hope you're doing what I did at the time. So after the film, after the field, the filming in the field, I had to actually rewrite the entire book. And I think it made for a more interesting book because I was able to infuse many different voices that came from the filmmaking and collaborative music process into the text itself. This brought me to a concern with musical practice, a very direct concern with musical practice, because I was working in the studios during the filmmaking process with these Caribbean musicians. And it gave me a very different insight into this process of making music and how it might actually impact the way we think about some of these research questions. I'm going to play you two very short clips. I hope I will transition smoothly from one to the other. And I hope that you will get a sense of what the uh, project in Trinidad in particular involved. I'm going to jump from video to video, so give me half a second to find my place, and I will just play you something.
I'm really excited and interested in working with, well, your culture and blending our cultures together. I think it would be really interesting because I tried it this year, and in Trinidad they really kicked up a big fuss about it. Our Indian community, they tried to say that I was disrespecting the sari, I was disrespecting the Indian man and the Indian women, and I was being very, what I should say, raunchy and degrading. But when you see,
don't worry about that.
That is what made it big, because when everybody heard this Indian group, what is it, Women Against Discrimination and Racism, that's the name of the group. When they made the fuss every day for all the months leading up to Carnival, every day, no lie, I was in the newspapers. It was just controversy, controversy, controversy. And after that, it just got bigger and bigger. And that's all everybody wanted to see me do. Put on the sari and come on stage and just, well, you'll see what I do. Pretty well, sorry. that you want? What is that you want? What is that you want to come? You think this is you want? So it was really good. It was a song about unity. I don't know how no one really realized what it is I was trying to say. Tati. Denise, baby, I'm your Indian man. This is Remo, I'm your Indian man.
Baby, put saucy baby. Okay, the first time I put Denise baby, second time I put saucy baby. Is that okay?
Started
Or
with
do you want?
saucy.
Started with saucy.
Started with saucy, yeah. What's my name? Yeah. Yeah. Nobody don't call me Denise again.
Denise saucy, wow, well.
Yeah. When they see the name on the billboard, they'll be like, Saucy, what? She not sure I go in. There's a Denise Belfort, no. Saucy.
So you feel? Great, man. That's it, baby, I'm your Indian man. This is Remo, I'm your Indian man. I don't have a dal belly, shaking like a big jelly. Dennis, baby, I'm your Indian man.
From India.
I'm vegetarian and I understand.
Authentic.
That you're looking for me, I'm your man.
Yeah.
Not because I'm from India.
100%.
You feel like a chunk of
Yeah.
fire, Remo,
Yeah.
I'm your Indian man.
Yeah. Come. Yeah.
I come from Port of Spain.
Where I'm from? Tell me. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Baby, I'm your Indian man.
Yes.
This is Remo, I'm your Indian man.
Let me talk about Trini. Yeah.
Like a big jelly.
No.
Baby, I'm your Indian man.
I hope so.
You're foreign and I understand.
Uh-huh.
You're looking for me, I'm your man.
You're rich.
Not because I'm from India.
Where
You
from?
feel like I'm chunka.
Where
I'm
from?
Remo, I'm your Indian man.
Come. Show me.
I want the chunka, you're a you. And you're my guy.
Title.
I'm from Kuman.
Title.
Straight from India.
Uh-huh.
You waste. Wine.
On my way. On my way.
It's always, you can hear me, right? Yeah. The film is available in the Lingnan library. I encourage Baptist friends to organize a set of screenings. So this is the first one I want to talk to you about. Let me get back to my presentation here. So having talked about how research-led practice became practice-led research, let me talk about the other project I engaged in with the same film director, Surabhi Sharma, some years later. The book has just been published. It's called Musicophilia in Mumbai. And here I tried to explore in this project the multimodal methods that I mentioned earlier. So the research is about musical practice and its cultural history, and it was carried out through a sustained engagement with practice as well as practitioners. So in the project, you'll find multiple layers of practice. You have the musical practice that I shared with my musicophiliac subjects, the filmmaker's practice, which I shared in as co-producer and conceptualizer, the architect's practice, which opened up the space of Mumbai's native town for me as I walked with architects through those streets, and the practice of the exhibition designer, in conversation with whom I curated the Making Music, Making Space exhibition in 2015. The actual writing up of the book followed on the heels of these different engagements with practice. So you can see that I was already moving towards a notion of practice as research. So let me talk a little bit about the content of the project. The main focus of the book is the passion for music manifested in Mumbai city from the late 19th century onwards. This is not a solitary passion, but one that is experienced together with other people in a public setting. So the idea of the public in my book involves the act of listening together, marked by spaces filled with music lovers. The physicality of gestures of appreciation, the performer's satisfaction at seeing a packed concert hall, the eye contact with certain known rasiks or connoisseurs, the silence of the audience as it is collectively moved on listening to a great performance, even that silence speaks volumes. In my book, which is focused on the great city of Bombay, Mumbai, I tell a story about what came to be called Indian classical music, more specifically Hindustani music, its practitioners and its listeners. It's a story of crisscrossing migrations and the formation of new urban spaces. At the center of the story is the musical subject, the musicophiliac, the person crazily in love with music, whom I call the diwana. My position as author is deeply informed by my own musicophilia as listener and amateur practitioner, and I do reference this throughout the book. So I'm going to play you now a very short clip from the film that I co-produced with Surabhi Sharma, directed by her. It's called Fir Se Sampe Aana in Hindi, and it means returning to the first beat. This is a reference to the rhythmic cycle in Indian music. You will see here a musicophiliac listening to old records, that actually used to belong to his mother. And the records are also, by a singer, very famous singer from the same community as him, which is a community of, former Devadasis, women dedicated to the god, who migrated, to Bombay to learn Hindustani music from the great Muslim teachers. So give me a second and I will share my screen with you.
क्या बात है? Not breath control. काही दिवसांनी काही लोकांनी ठरवलं की आपण आपलं इथं वीक.
So although in this clip that you just saw, the man is listening alone to his records, the acquisition of autographs on the records takes him into a number of concert halls. The very existence of this musical subject depends on their immersion in a social space. So I use the term the social subject to refer to such persons. The social subjects who inhabit these spaces, and I will show you more of the spaces in a little bit, These social subjects inhabit the great imperial city of Mumbai and are bound together by what I call a culture of collective listening. They respond to Hindustani music through ways drawn from what I've called the Metropolitan Unconscious. So this Metropolitan Unconscious for me is a vast repertoire of collective forms of responding, of ways of living, of ways of inhabiting the city. It doesn't belong to any one person. It's not an individual consciousness. It's not an individual unconscious, but it's something that you can draw upon as a member of that larger collective of musical subjects who are urban inhabitants. So I want to assert then that these notions of musical selfhood emerged in the long 20th century in Mumbai. And these notions of selfhood were quite unlike the normative individual of Euro-American modernity. Importantly, the musical self or the social subject of music is forged through collective experience and through social interaction in physical spaces. So let me speak a little bit about how the film came about. In 2011, I was already learning Hindustani music in Mumbai. When I thought about this project, I approached my friend Surubi and I said, you really messed up my project last time because we did the film last. This time we'll begin with the film. We will do the research and the film together, and one will reflect the other and one will impact the other in hopefully significant ways. So I think this is an important part of the methodology. It's not simply an academic project where I say, I'll work on this, here's my archive, here are my texts, and I will then write about it. Neither is it a conventional ethnography. It certainly isn't, since it has a lot to do with how one engages with practitioners of various kinds. So let me return to my proposition about a multimodal methodology. Not only does the project deal with different materials, it also speaks to very diverse audiences. And I think if we are to survive in academia, we need to be able to do this. We can't any longer speak to a small number of people to publish something, to get a promotion, and to stick that publication in the library shelf or in the database. I think public engagement is crucial if we have to try and understand the gravity of the questions that we would like to ask, and engagement in multiple modes. So just to say this again, I curated an exhibition, we produced a film, and there's the book. All of these are aspects of the project, but not one is supplementary to the other. They all work together to create a collective endeavor of trying to explore this question of space and music in Mumbai. Here's another clip, the last one from Returning to the First Beat. And here you can catch glimpses of the spaces of music that I talk about extensively in my book. And you'll also catch a glimpse in the second clip of a young singer who I hope is online with us today, who features also in my current project that I will talk about next. So again, give me a second and I will find the right clip for you.
And I remember
The you saw in that last clip a very old concert hall from the early 20th century called Lashmi Bagh, which we revived for the purposes of the project, and I was able to host concerts by young musicians in that space. And subsequently, it's also opened up, for other performances. Although, of course, now everything is closed at the moment. Um, so, one can discuss each project in great detail, and I think I'll save that time for the question answer session, because I think it's better that I am able to demonstrate through the footage and through how the footage intersects with the ideas I have about these projects, to give you some glimpse of that, and then to have a much lengthier discussion later. So let me now move on to the last of my examples. I see that I have plenty of time, so I'm going to indulge myself and show you more clips than I had hoped to do. I think we can do that quite easily. This current project is called Saath Saath Music Across the Waters. Saath Saath is in Hindustani means together, together. And Music Across the Waters is to indicate that it's Indian musicians who are collaborating with different forms of Chinese music in different locations, including Hong Kong. So how did this come about? In 2016, I moved to Hong Kong to teach at Lingnan. And in that year, Surabhi Sharma and I repurposed videos from the Making Music, Making Space exhibition to show at the Shanghai Art Biennale, where they are now part of the permanent collection at the Power Station of Art. To coincide with the Biennale opening, I took 3 Hindustani vocalists to present concerts and workshops. During that time, we were introduced to a troupe of Kinchu performers. Kinchu is the Shanghainese opera, and to a pipa player. We talked to them about working together. We had no idea. Through multiple layers of translation, we decided that we might do something in the coming couple of years. If you're to ask me, then was that a research project? I have to admit that I had the haziest of ideas as to what the research objectives of such a project might be. My work on Hindustani music in Mumbai had thrown up a number of questions about musical subjects, about the performance of modernity, about colonialism and cultural practice. Just as I had taken my Indian questions to the Caribbean with startling results, I now brought them to China via Hong Kong. Here there was no subaltern diaspora on which to pin my questions. Instead, there existed multiple forms of Orientalist knowledge, rendering the Asian neighbors quite opaque to one another in the present. So here are just some very preliminary questions that set me off on this journey. What is our relationship to the past as we envisage it in Asia? What does it mean to acquire the skills to perform Indian classical music or play the pipa or to act in Kinchu opera today? What do modes of performance and musical teaching styles in India and China tell us about how we relate to our everyday worlds? What happens when Indian and Chinese musicians meet? Are they able to overcome the lack of a shared language or languages in the sense of Cantonese and Mandarin? Can they communicate through voice and melody? Do they simply perform their own music, or can they actually create new music together? In a sense, those musical crossings date back to the 6th century, a good 1,400 years ago. That's when musical scales in China, I'm told, were transformed under the influence of Indian or South Asian music. Here then is truly, at last, an example of practice-led research. 3 years of musical interaction, soon to be a film, with 2 accompanying music CDs, long before I begin writing. So I will show you a couple of clips to begin with, end with a few remarks, and then show you a couple more clips. So here I will show you something that we, in this particular clip, you'll see a Hindustani trained musician, a North Indian classical music trained singer, leading the collaboration. And you have the 2 instrumentalists, one from Hong Kong, one from Shanghai, who try to keep pace with her and try to follow that. And in the next clip, the reverse happens. So let me play you this one first.
This is not the pitch I usually sing in, but let's see. प्रेम बरसाया अखियाँ प्रेम बरसाया जन जाने दुखदा नाम स्नेह कारणे this tune, if it's okay, we can learn it together. Rest of it is all we can play around a lot.
Yeah. Maybe we don't need to. I don't think I need to play this tune. I can
just this tune.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Only these two lines, if you can bring in, because it's like a chorus.
Ah, okay.
So it will be a place where we can bring in together. Rest of the composition is left for it to shape however. It's not bound by anything. So we can rhythmically take it or non-rhythmically, it's fine.
Can you sing the chorus again?
Nano antare ta ta ra ra ta ta ra ra ta ta ra ra ta ta ra ra. Yeah. Nano antare आवतु नैनो अंतर आवतु नैनो अंतर आवतु नैनो अंतर
It's not in Chinese music at all. So even we do something, it will sound very not Chinese.
Okay.
Yeah, because the scale does not exist in Chinese music.
So it's absolutely new in your
The scale, yes. Yeah.
So what she is asking you is, keeping the Indian scale, can you do something Chinese in this?
Or if you just improvise as Kimbo, leave Chinese as Kimbo.
In fact, we are already doing this, I think. In fact, even when we do the composition, I think we are already doing this.
Okay.
So,
we are already.
Yeah, if they play independently, then you'll know what they're improvising.
That's what.
So what suggestion is there? Because it shouldn't sound too perfect.
Yeah.
And we also need to know the journey from where they have traveled, like what's the journey they have taken to come here.
Right.
So it would be nice if they actually did, like we are doing with everyone else, if each one of them could play something on their own. It doesn't have to be tinged with Bhairav necessarily. And then they play this with you, we can see the movement.
Right.
Sorry, I'm having some trouble with the screen share. Just give me 1 second. I have too many windows open here. There we go. I think I have a little time with permission from John Winsenberg and Meta. I would like to play definitely one more clip and maybe another one after that. So this one, I hope my dear friend Chow Yufai is here in the audience. If he isn't, this is a tribute to him. And here we face a really interesting issue, which I would like to take further in the discussion. We have been working with Chow Yu Fai for the last 3 or 4 years. In the first instance, we began by taking a poem that he had written in Cantonese a long time ago and singing it in Hindustani melodic style. 3 different singers with 3 different versions of that same poem. And in the second year, they sent pre-composed melodies to Chow Yu Fai, and he wrote he wrote lyrics to those melodies. So in a sense, the unusual sound patterns sent by the musicians, unusual for Cantonese speakers, allowed him to produce new Cantonese words in a particular collocation. So this is one experiment that we have a short documentation of. So you'll get to see that now. Again, please give me a second to sort out the screen sharing issue.
So this is what I have created, inspired by the music by these 3 extremely talented people. So I will first read the first one, and then Okta will perform.
Sorry, I don't know why this is happening. Okay, I have the video on my screen. It is playing. But
So this is what I have created, inspired by the music by these 3 extremely talented people. So I will first read the first one, and then Okta will perform.
I'm sorry, I'm unable to find this clip on my screen. I don't know why that's happening. Okay. Okay, there we go.
So this is what I have created, inspired by the music by these 3 extremely talented people. So I will first read the first one, and then Okta will perform. 冰找到夏蟲，歲月長，期望老。冰找到夏蟲，你未來，人未老，想找到我。從來沒有的無數，詩總會記錄。原來常有的無數，可知道不知道？雨漸濃，水漸老，輕找到蟲。懷疑什麼太遠無，永遠被我視服；為什麼貴族，永遠的愛慾。明明覺得找不到，雪景豔紅；明明意想不到，傷會心綠。歲月長，期望老，冰會找到夏蟲。Thank you. Okay.
乜字的？不知道。
知道，你諗未到？
Do. Again, do? Same thing?
Yeah, same word.
Okay.
Okay. 雨漸濃。
What's that again?
雨。Yeah, and then 雨。and then give the Y to it. Because you're like you,
yeah.
then it's
You.
just the just the you, yeah.
You.
Yeah.
You. Oh my God, Natalie, you can read Kannada?
No, I just get the phrasing and oh, it should be this word.
Yes, it is actually. Yes.
Okay. Why?
Next line, right?
Yeah. Why?
Why?
Yeah, it's like why? Why? It's the same. Why?
Why?
Yeah.
Okay.
Ye.
Ye.
Ye is like why ye in English. Yeah.
So I think I've reached the end of my allotted hour. But if you will permit me, I would like to play one last song. Yes, John? Okay. I will just find it in a second. So the last composition we present here is something that Zen has put together. Some time ago, he did a composition called Given the Shortage of Time, and Zen only came here 4 or 5 days ago. So the Tarana, which is green Tara, but presented through Zen's efforts. So thank you again, Zen, for coming. Thanks to the fabulous musicians here. And now the presentation of the Tarana. I just want to say here that these concerts are available on the last one was from a concert, it's not from the film. It's available on satsatmusic.com. All the concerts that have been performed so far in Hong Kong, in Bangalore, in Mumbai, in Shanghai, in Hangzhou, Wuhan, and other places. So please do take a look when you can. So I think that I've come to the end of my somewhat scattered reflections, but I hope the film footage made up for all that. And I'm very happy to take some questions, or if there are other people in the audience more qualified to answer those questions, and I will see if my collaborators are there, they could speak up as well. So thank you all for giving me this opportunity.
Well, thank you very, very much, Professor Niranjana. This is extremely intriguing, stimulating from so many different standpoints. And I'm very, very happy because, of course, it's when we first started discussing in your presentation, we were trying to find the right kind of approach for addressing practice as research. And I don't think we could have found a better way to do it. Very stimulating from the creative standpoint, and of course, in terms of framing your research approach. So I just want to say thank you very, very much for such a thoughtful presentation and intriguing and stimulating conversation with us as well. As we get started, I would like to invite all of our viewers and guests who are joining us today to feel free to send us questions through the chat. You can either send it directly to me, or you could also send it to the Arts Faculty Dean's office on the chat box there, and then that will get forwarded to me. And I'm looking forward to having further stimulating conversation. So as we kind of get that started, and I'm sure a lot of people are gathering thoughts here, I'd be delighted to kind of get the conversation moving, or at least continuing from what you have already presented us. And I'm struck by so many different things that we're dealing with here. And to kind of help frame it, I would go back and reiterate then what Dean Hjort had mentioned to us in the introduction, and that was kind of the reason for our practice as research workshops here. We've found it, many of us have found it challenging for approaches, those of us who are involved in creative work and creative practice like yourself, and trying to find the right research approach, and finding something that doesn't take away from the creative practice itself. And you've offered us some very, very concrete examples. And so I kind of wanted to follow up on some of the things that you had mentioned to begin with here. So you had mentioned the multimodality, and we've seen that, of course, in action here in so many different ways and in so many different levels. And you mentioned that you found yourself wanting to find something that was more audience-based, and of course we're trying to deal with that as we have to deal with impact beyond academia. And as I watch your videos and all the examples, I'm immediately struck by how my experience and my perception of the music changes by not only the video element, but the way that you portrayed it. It changes the way I hear it because of the different contexts, the way we see the musicians interacting, preparing for the music. And so from my standpoint, it really changes my experience, and it makes me want to visit those places. So I wanted to ask you to kind of begin with here. Does the process of reaching these wider audiences, as you've clearly made a priority, does that transform the essence of the research itself in your mind? From where you mentioned if you were only preparing to write a book versus then adding all these other elements there, do you find that the center of the research, the essence of the research, somehow expands or changes focus somehow?
That's a very complicated question, and thanks for prodding me in that regard. I think that very often, as it happens, and I've spoken about this earlier, that one serendipitously moves from one location to another, or one engagement to another, and then it's only in hindsight. And my friend Surabhi, I think, is not with us today, but I've learned a lot from her practice as a filmmaker. She says, get the footage first. And then on the editing table, we'll figure out what the narrative is. And I think that in this kind of project, I would have had to, follow a similar method. That the very first project, Mobilizing India, it was very traditional, research oriented. It had ethnography, it had, a huge amount of secondary literature, engagement with historical questions, archival work, and all of that. And then I had to, throw some of that out of the window to make space for the kind of vibrancy and complicated issues about gender that the filmmaking process brought to the fore. So I think that from that time on, and that was quite some time ago, like 10 years ago, even 15 years ago, that I think I've been very alert to that possibility and very open to that possibility. That I might think one way as the scholar in the project, if you like, but the other collaborators may take another direction. And very often, I think it has benefited me to follow those directions and help me to reorganize my own thoughts in the process. There's not so much concern about the audience, but concern about how the question is shaping itself. And that question shapes itself through the engagement with practice of different kinds.
I'd really like to follow up on that because I really feel that a lot of people now who are dealing with this concept of practice as research do have to think this through a great deal. Did you find yourself, first of all, did you find yourself discussing your research as in research terms with any of the creative collaborators, or is that something that you tried to buffer, that you tried to protect them from in a way?
Well, I really want to mention here that two of my key collaborators, Bindu Malini and Rutuja, are both here. And they will know that I have not sheltered them from anything. In fact, I've had to shelter myself from the intensity of their engagement with practice. So I think it would be really wonderful if both of them could say something in this process. Rutuja in particular was my research assistant before she became my collaborator. And so she knows very well the kind of work I did. Rutuja, would you like to speak up? Can they unmute themselves? Yeah, there's Rutuja. Would you want to say something about how we engaged in the research process together? That your contribution is not just providing the music, but actually shaping the research question. If both of you could say something about that. Can they unmute themselves, John? Or yeah.
Okay. Hello, everybody, and thank you for this beautiful sharing in this session, because even for me, having journeyed with Tejaswini and other musicians in the last 3 years, to have glimpses of it coming back to me after a year really helps me go back, like you said, like Professor said, helps me go back and reflect on a lot of things, and to also reflect on the kind of journey that has happened through these 3 years, plus how probably it has changed the course of my thinking, my practice, my application, my engagement has changed. So like Tejaswini said, for me, when I look back at the footage, and to have a footage while there is research, to also visually go back to those spaces, even for me, is very valuable. And like we say, the beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. Here, Tejaswini and Surabhi and many others as observers, their presence as observers has really changed the flavor of engagement for each of us practitioners, to question oneself as why this music, what, and go into all those subtle nuances of not just the sound, but where is it coming from, what is the intention, and what is also now this whole musical exchange where there's this language divide, or a divide of not really being so familiar in terms of where the music comes from, what impacts the music, what directs the music emotionally, scientifically, and even its development, its evolution, really put us in spaces where there was a lot of silence to first understand what's going on, and to leave certain things unanswered, but still let it evolve, which I also feel is being greatly guided by our own practice of how Hindustani music itself evolves. It allows for discovery every moment. As much as there's a framework, it is always allowing and encouraging for not just self-discovery, but of the music also. So uh, did I somewhere answer what you were asking or
Very,
share
very much.
something?
Very much. And from my standpoint, because this is really at the forefront of a lot of our thoughts right now, in terms of, for those of us who are involved in both research and creative practice, wanting to make sure that somehow the research invigorates the creative process. And you just mentioned it, it actually added a discovery process rather than disturbing it, rather than getting in the way. So you certainly find then that it actually helped you, that it actually enhanced your process then.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, fantastic.
So I wonder
Thank
if my other collaborator, Rutuja, who's also here, would like to say
Yes.
something about her own involvement in my earlier project and then in the current one.
Yeah. So just to sum up, it's really a fulfilling experience just to see what journey we have taken. And I think as a practitioner, it is important for me also to have that uh, to have an academic perspective of how the music is not just isolated. It's a product, and it's an outcome of so many other factors interacting together. And that's what I realized specifically while working on the Mumbai project, like about musicophilia in Mumbai, and even just reading and revisiting how far we have come. It's something which helps me to draw parallels, to perceive the current scenario, to view my current practice, and how am I able to respond to the society as an artist, and how society is also affecting my practice. Some like these mutually influencing factors, how it enhances my practice. So it just helps me to review these aspects, which is so very essential. And I think that I'm also starting to perceive lot many things which I used to not see. So it's all thanks to Tejaswini for involving me in her project. And it sort of gives me a base to see a lot of things, and which continues to be a part of my practice. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Wonderful. As a quick follow-up to that, I'm just curious, by chance, has it then, have some of these new discoveries of new ways of looking or thinking about your music, has it actually then led you to add anything, change anything, or even plan any kind of new type of project?
So right now, I think I am more in the position of perceiving things. I can't say that, how actively I'm able to change, or, if I'm able to change, how aware I am, I don't know. So it's right now, I think I am more in the perceiving stage, just to see how am I able to perceive and respond to that.
But if I may add, they're being very modest. But if I may add, I think that they have an extended repertoire now in multiple languages, including Cantonese. So I know that recently I was on something listening to Rutuja performing at a particular venue on Zoom, and someone in the audience asked her for a Cantonese song, and she sang it. So I think that yes, she's still in the perceiving stage, but I think there are ways by which that interaction with trying to match the melodies of Hindustani music to the tones of Cantonese has been a really difficult exercise. And it's something that people have been very dexterous in trying to do. I'm hoping it will impact their own vocal training.
I'm sure. And then just one last question, then we've got a number of questions coming in that I will get to. Did then seeing yourselves in the film project, as opposed to, of course, when you listen to yourselves in recordings, of course, when you're performing live, you're doing it, you're in the moment. And then if you have a chance to listen to your live recording or to your studio recording, you then get a new kind of a feedback to yourself. What about when you see, because the way that the film then projects the process of the musicians, from my standpoint as a musician, changes my perception as well. Did you also get a different viewpoint of your own musical process by seeing the film, the documentary?
Okay, I think Rutuja is waiting for me to respond probably. To actually tell you, this is the first time even I'm getting to see certain clips from this. So it is definitely going to, it is already impacting me. And to really look at what's going on, how the energy exchanges, how everything is, it's teaching me a lot. And yes, it is definitely going to impact a lot, because we are all deeply in love with our own selves, and to see ourselves there is going to be quite something.
Okay.
I would like to add one thing, that it felt very different to see ourselves uh, on the screen, as opposed to the way we were, engaging into the practice at that during the process of filming. So the both I'm feeling very different now when I see myself on the film and on the screen. And like I said, it gives me a sense of fulfillment, that the experience was very fulfilling on a lot many levels.
Yeah, and I really think from the viewer's standpoint too. I mean, we would have loved attending live performances or listening to the recordings, but then seeing your process as well was very rewarding, richly rewarding. Okay, then let me get to some of the questions. We've got some really great questions coming in, and so the first one that is for Professor Niranjana is from Supraja. And this one, it's a little bit long, so I'll take a minute to read this out to you. I was curious as to what Professor Niranjana envisages of the encounter by way of such culturally significant social subjects encountering each other through practice. I wonder in particular about the meeting of, say, with the Jahaji music, that of Subaltern Diaspora, and those of the contemporary throwing up aspects of respectability and so on. With that of, do I pronounce it correctly? Saat?
Yes.
Yeah, having musicians engage in a give and take with musical practices that may have had a hand historically in social stratification.
Yeah. I'll try to catch what I can of this question, which I think is working at many levels. But just to keep things a little simpler, I'll just talk about the contrast. And I hope that the questioner, Supraja, whom I know, will get to see both the films. I just want to tell you that Surabhi Sharma has a WordPress.com site where you can watch the films for free. You just pay if you have to download. So do watch the entire film Jahaji Music, and do watch the entire film Returning to the First Beat. Of course, Sat Sat is not yet ready, but we will have that up pretty soon. And just say that, yes, these are in many ways encounters across cultures. And yes, in the first instance, I was trying to ask a question about self-formation, about gender, about femininity, about masculinity in the Indian context. And in engaging with Caribbean music, I was able to, I think, helpfully, because of the diaspora question and the indentured diaspora, which is what I call the subaltern diaspora, there was a way in which I could talk about the kind of subjectivity, the kind of femininity that gets delegitimized in the process of the formation of Indian nationalism. So yes, in a sense, stratified subjects, stratified gendered subjects, if you like. And I think through bringing in a contemporary musician, in that instance, serendipitously, he was male and not female. I think that would have been a very different project. But someone who was, is also ambiguously gendered, was quite willing to play with that question of, yes, I'm your authentic Indian man, etc. I think that interaction in the realm of popular culture and Caribbean music, and the give and take of that particular collaboration, which I had the good fortune to observe and to participate in because I helped to write the lyrics for that song, for instance. Through that, I think we shake up certain fixities and revisit those histories from a different perspective, from the contemporary. And I think that in many ways, the questions I asked there help me to look at, the Hindustani music situation in Mumbai in quite a different way, and ask not the same questions, but maybe similar questions that led to a very different project altogether. In the Sat Sat instance, the focus is not so much on trying to understand delegitimized or cast out subjects from the question of Indian nationalism or femininity. That is not what propelled it. I mean, very simply put, I had relocated for some time to this part of the world, that is East Asia, and my preoccupation was music. I was quite interested in finding out how Hindustani musicians who would have been very classically, rigorously trained, and would also see as a condition of their subjectivity that their vocal training is tied to their condition of subjectivity. What might happen to them if they're confronted by another seemingly ancient civilization with its own opacities as far as the Indians are concerned, but seemingly with a historical connection, which could not be unearthed in that interaction because it's of too many layers of the past. So I think that engagement has a very different flavor. It is doesn't allow us simply to look back on certain Indian historical formations. I think it does help us instead to reflect on the present of Indian classical music, which in Chinese they would say traditional music, because for them classical is Western. In India, classical is not Western. And that, I think, gives us a very different sense of how Hindustani music plays a significant role in the formation of a certain idea of national culture, and in a sense, how that idea of national culture also has determined how Hindustani music is commonsensically perceived today and very often practiced today. I think I've been very fortunate that singers like Rutuja and Bindu and also Omkar, who's not here at the moment, were able to really take on board these very difficult situations where they had to question their own subjectivity because their own vocal training is being questioned when you're being thrown into a context of talking to a Cantonese poet or trying to work with a folk singer from who's based in Beijing. But in that particular clip, she sang in the Kazakh language. It's a very famous folk song about yearning and loss. And then she sings it in Mandarin. And then the two women, Rutuja and Bindu, also join in with her and are able to do a Hindustani number on that Mandarin song. So I think that a lot is happening there. It's in a state of the destabilizing of accepted subjectivities, and where that will take us, I don't know. I still haven't written the book.
I'm intrigued by some of the points you just raised now, because you can see that in the video. It's a little bit like for those of us who have started learning a language, a foreign language as an adult, where you're suddenly cast back into the role of a child. And you could see the one instance with the PaR where she was having to reduce her melody back to just the core few notes there, just so that they could get that to begin with, and then kind of they could re-engage and start to spring out in their own idiom of their different instruments there, which they did really amazingly well. That's another thing I'd like to talk to you about later. Let me go on to some more questions here then. One is then from Dean Yurt, who asks, Teju, you used the term experiment on a number of occasions. Could you say more about the idea of experimentation as a means of framing research questions that also facilitate practice?
Yeah, again, I must say that this is all hindsight. So, one does many, many crazy things and one can only treat them as experiments. It's too disturbing otherwise to think that that has forever changed the course of something you're going to do. So I've used experiment obviously quite metaphorically, and I didn't realize I was stressing that word so much. Maybe it shows the anxiety of the researcher that we are not really, I mean, in science you can do experiments. In the humanities we don't do experiments, right? That we are in many ways also, in the kind of setting we are in today in Hong Kong, prescribed certain accepted modes of proceeding with our research and ways of asking questions. So if I had tried in some modest way to destabilize that ways of asking a question, I think that one can perhaps dignify it with the name experiment. I don't know, maybe one can just say, hey, we are also entitled to experiment. And this is how we might want to, I don't want to say formalize it because I don't think it can be done. And I can't say that our method is experiment or experimentation, no, by no means at all. But I still think that there is some value in trying new things. And only in that sense, I meant experimentation. And very often these are situations one is thrown into and not entirely by choice. And I think that a lot of research is like that, although researchers may not want to admit it, that there's so much to do with where you find yourself, what you engage with, what happens, serendipity. As I said, I think that featured more than experiment in my talk. So I wouldn't want to make it a hard and fast method, but I do think, as I mean, I think that someone as old as me can afford to be experimental, and I know that many younger colleagues cannot really afford that because they have so much of weight to carry in terms of these assessment practices. I think that those of us who are in, I mean, I'm not in any great senior position, but like Meta Hiot or yourself, John, if you could perhaps think of ways by which you could make these legitimate, these efforts to try and engage with practice, or that I think it does need in a place like Hong Kong, it's very hierarchical. It needs that kind of pressure from people who are actually in certain offices to be able to make a difference. And I hope that my practitioner colleagues in the audience are hearing this, especially those in Hong Kong. It's a terrible time to be a young academic in Hong Kong, and I think that they need a lot of help.
Well, this goes back to a little bit to that question that I had asked before about whether it could invigorate or whether it would inevitably disturb the practice there, because my own experience now, as you mentioned, kind of dealing with some of the junior colleagues, the emerging and the newer colleagues coming in who are starting in their early careers now, who may not be from this tradition of practice as research is not, for example, not really a commonly used term in the US, whereas in the UK, of course, it would be very well known. And so they're trying to make their adjustments in terms of the career path there. And I can see, as I've had a discussion with some of them, and a few of them are in the audience today here, that they're really, I can kind of see in their eyes that they're sensing that, well, this would get in the way of my creative process there. But as you mentioned, the serendipity, the kind of the energy, the experimentation there is one way to invigorate it. I also wonder if you mentioned that approaching this as a potentially scientific approach, even though we're not going to try to frame it scientifically. But for example, did you have a hypothesis of any sort, kind of a metaphorical hypothesis that then got kind of waylaid by serendipity of some sort, or of accidents that you came across?
Yeah, I must confess I didn't. That I think that very early on, I mean, I started some of this work in the early 90s when I was myself like a beginning researcher, early career academic, and I just sort of followed things as my inclination took me. And I think that, like I said, I was very happy to find a filmmaker collaborator very early on. And I could begin to see that, yes, of course, some of this stuff is put together much later. That you go and you, follow your instincts, collect a lot of like stuff that interests you, and then see what you can pull out of it. So I think the hypothesis very often comes later, although we badger our poor PhD students to produce it in the first 6 months of their apprenticeship.
Even in the sense of, even in terms of the grant proposals, where you have to come up with a hypothesis. But do you see anything wrong with coming up with kind of an initially framed hypothesis and then changing it through the process of serendipity or of other kinds of experiences that you might come across? Do you see any problem with that?
No, not at all. Not at all.
No.
Because I think it takes courage, but it's also perfectly legitimate. It happens in the sciences. I mean, you can test a vaccine and find it doesn't work, right? So we can also try something. We said India, China, musical, whatever doesn't work. And that's a finding. We say that, why did it not work? If you are able to try and explain that.
Yeah.
And we have many reasons to talk about the failures.
Exactly.
And very instructive ways of discussing failure.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where I see the opportunity of practice as a research rather than the hindrance of practice as research. Exactly why we shouldn't fear it so much. Another question here from Professor John Ernie. Given this, and on the lines of serendipity here, given the serendipitous nature of the research journey, I suspect it changes the practice of research itself in many ways. I wonder if it changes, to use a musical term, the tempo, because of the strong sense of presence and immediacy of the people and places you showed us.
Hmm. Oh, that's a lovely question, John. Thank you. Tempo is a beautiful way of describing it. And I think that what I have found in the two projects, which both are obviously taking a long time, and I can afford at my level of seniority to take time to produce a monograph, because I like to work on larger projects rather than an article every 3 months or whatever is demanded by the system, right? And I can afford to do that. And because of that, I think that I have let the I've let the collaboration, the musical engagement dictate the tempo of the research. And of course, there are ways by which, if there are younger colleagues embarking on such projects, there are ways in which, of course, you can every now and then pull back from it and write something and publish it. I'm sure there are journals kind enough to publish work in progress which reflects on such questions. But on the, in the longer term, I think it might be worthwhile to put everything together as some sort of, a folder of all your many efforts at engagement, and see if it could be presented as a larger whole, which I think would leave a far greater impact on even the academic and the collaborative scenario in the end. There is too much itty-bitty research going on because of this pressure of peer reviews and grading and ranking and stuff like that, unfortunately. But again, this here is somewhere where the the senior people in the unit or the department could help out here by showing people how to take these what might seem like very slight engagements with their own tempos and pull them together to make it something far more sustained.
And that's certainly something that we're having to do with, say, the RAE, the research assessment exercise there for the non-traditional outputs, where you are expected to provide some kind of a portfolio that then describes kind of your research journey. And again, I've seen kind of mixed reception from various colleagues, junior to senior, who maybe see it as something that's tedious or something that's maybe deflecting away from their creative impetus. But it could be itself a kind of a creative journey. And again, they often will overlook the importance, a lot of the small things that they already take for granted because they've been doing these practices for so many years and they think it's so elementary. But when you have to frame it on the outside for the non-initiated audience there, helping them understand that, they really would appreciate a lot of those minute details. And that's something that we certainly saw in your film. We get to see some of those minute details of the musicians at work, and really does suddenly stimulate. It doesn't cover it. It doesn't drag it down. If anything, it can add additional life to it there.
Right, right. So my suggestion would then be that very often it's very difficult to see it in your own practice. If you are a creative practitioner in the performing arts or the visual arts or some other practice, that it might help to have a small group of colleagues who can ask questions and prompt a new way, way of thinking about it, a new reflection on the process. I think this can't be a single isolated problem that we have to carry. It needs to be worked on together. And I'm sure as a department or a unit or a group of people, I'm sure you can all help one another excavate or surface some of these very difficult issues.
Yes, and in fact, that's precisely the reason that we're doing this. I mean, this is to bring the group together. Now we're in a wider array here at the faculty level and beyond, but that's exactly the kinds of things through these kinds of events now that we're actually for the first time discussing, whereas a lot of people wouldn't normally come together to discuss that. Now, another question from Supraja here, who said it would be great if Professor Niranjana could talk of how she navigates through affect as motivation and consequence of these projects.
Oh, that's a very, very hard one. I don't know. I'll have to, I think, reflect on that more to figure that out, because I know that the term affect is like floating around a lot these days, but I find it very difficult to describe what I do or what I experience only in those terms. So it's going to take some time for me to figure out how to talk about that. But clearly, I'm sure that although Rutuja or Bindu may not use the term affect, I think that the kind of space we occupied together and which we continue to occupy, because separated by geography now, but still in touch and working towards the virtual concert sometime soon. I think that if it weren't for these affective bonds that we have developed through the music, that we won't be able to continue working with one another. So it's not so much about the research itself, it's about the consequences of the research, where I find there is a certain affective milieu that we have built together. But more than that, I'll have to think about this too. I could come back to Supraja some other time.
Okay, okay. We do welcome more questions if anyone has them. In the meantime, I do have a couple more, if you'll forgive me, because there's just so many things that came to mind when I was watching your presentation and some of your clips. So the first one that I would want to raise had to do with kind of your crossing over between traditional and non-traditional research. You're crossing over between text-based research and non-text-based research here. And so I'm kind of curious to how you view something like your books now. You mentioned that you actually went back and rewrote some of the books based on the film project that you had worked on. And then I could see that you mentioned also that in the film, it seemed to become both creative and scholarly in and of itself. Whereas I'm wondering if then the book became more creative than it might have been. I think you mentioned that it did there. And so from your standpoint now, are you viewing these different media in clear terms as scholarly versus creative, or are they starting to overlap? Are you viewing the film as both creative and scholarly and the book as both creative and scholarly?
John, for the first question, I really wish that Surabhi had been here, because we've had many conversations about this, and very often we've jointly featured in programs where we've talked about this. So that may have to wait for another occasion. I wouldn't say her films are scholarly, and the 3 films she's done with me, but I think it's informed by the research in a very strong way. And it's through a conversation between a filmmaker and a researcher that even those preoccupations have emerged, whether it's the shot, whether it's the silence, whether it's the sounds that you hear around you. So my exploration, for example, of the spaces of Mumbai began to happen before she came on the scene, and then we started doing every one of these walks together with the film crew very often, so that it was like a joint process. I wouldn't say that one came first and the other came later. I think that because it's a joint process, it's so difficult to say, is my book creative? I mean, I imagine that all books are creative. So I think this is too simple a dichotomy to produce, and I would urge younger colleagues not to fall into the trap. That I think we are grateful in the humanities not to produce, tables and other evidence of empirical research, that we are able to adopt a tone and a modality and a kind of engagement with the subjects of our study, which can be, somewhat non-conventional. And I think that there are some good presses still willing to publish things like that, which is helpful. But if it weren't for that, I guess I would just be online. It's so difficult to find the right publishers for this kind of work. And there is, again, so much pressure to do that. Exactly. I keep saying, oh, this is my last academic book. I've had enough. I'm just going to do a non-academic book, or I'm only going to write a blog or whatever. I keep threatening to do that. But I feel now there's a third book waiting to be written after mobilizing India and Musicophilia in Mumbai. So I guess I have to see it through.
That's heartening, though, to see that you're further stimulated by the process. If you'd forgive me, I know it's already late in the day, but I want to kind of deal with some of the nomenclature that you've raised as well in your presentation early on. You mentioned how you had shifted from research-led practice to practice-led research. And as we start to adopt the concept of practice as research and impact, as we have been doing in the recent years in Hong Kong, it's important for us to actually understand what we're saying and how some of these terms might be clear or unclear. And so I just wanted to, you showed us in your presentation how you had, for example, in the order of your process, you would change the order of your process and the order of your outputs, so to speak. But I just wonder if you could maybe step back and kind of summarize a little bit about what you mean by changing from research-led practice to practice-led research in general terms.
Yeah. So I think that I'll take the example, the first example, because that's where I came up with this phrase, which you remember, right? So in mobilizing India, I mean, this, like I said, it was a very long lasting project, partly because I would only go for short times to the Caribbean, given, I was a scholar in India without much of a salary. So I had to work, to depend on grants to be able to travel. So for all kinds of reasons, for all kinds of logistical reasons, the engagement was infrequent, but it lasted over a period of 10 years. And I was teaching myself ethnographic methods. I was trying to interview people. In those days, we had, cassette recorders, which people have forgotten today. So, all of that, the materiality and the struggles of doing the research in that way deeply impacted me. And I did attend Carnival in Trinidad, or I would try to go to concerts, but that was the closest I came to a musical practitioner of music. And so I kept writing about them. I kept hearing their music, writing about it. And it was only in that last year when I took the rock pop singer, Remo Fernandez, that I got to be on first name terms with these musicians that I was writing about, were some of the leading practitioners of calypso, of soca, of chutney in Trinidad. And I'm still in touch with them, via Instagram or whatever, 15 years later. It's quite strange that that kind of connection was forged, which couldn't have been done by my wandering around trying to interview people and do research in all these libraries and read about indentureship, read about the history of Trinidad, and so on and so forth, right? So it is very, very hard because I was going from a southern location to another southern location, not knowing very much about the history, because all the forms of knowledge that we have make that history opaque to us. And in India in particular, it was opaque because they were delegitimized subjects of Indian nationalism. So it was a really arduous research effort to try and excavate those histories, and then to square that with my experiential engagement with the present in Trinidad, which is why I started looking at popular cultural forms. So and when I brought in, so my practice of research was led by musical practice in a certain sense, not my own practice, but the practice I was observing, and that permeated that entire society because everyone was a singer in some sense, right? Everyone was a calypsonian. And then it's only when the film crew came in and when the filmmaker joined the project in the very last year and the singer. So with the singer and the filmmaker, everything changed because I did have some, feeble, I made some feeble attempts to invite the singer to my hometown, Bangalore, to invite the filmmaker, to discuss with them what my research has been. And I would say these are the genres of music in the Caribbean. This is the musical culture. This is where I think there are some similarities. And I could feel that people were glazing over. And it was only when the filmmaker said to me, "Oh, we are going to this Caribbean place. I've never been there before." She says, "How will I know what to film?" And then she said, "Okay, find me, a dance hall queen. Find me someone who works in Carnival. Find me some." And I was saying, what kind of demands are these? Which academic had to put up with demands like this? So I felt very put upon. And but I felt that, yes, of course I have to do this. This is what a film requires. And that really stretched my resources as a researcher, stretched my contacts. I had to create space to be able to continue asking my questions, even though when you're like, deep in some entrenched town at midnight, trying to figure out what was going on and whether we were even safe in that location. So I think that there you could see that the practice was leading me by the nose, and the practice was determining entirely what and how I would excavate something. And I think that when the film was done, when I kept watching the footage, is when I was rewriting the book. So we have 80 hours of footage and only 1 hour, 50-minute film, right? So I know all those 80 hours of footage. And I think that that really helped me because I could glean from it much that I could not have gathered by, burrowing in archives or in libraries. So I think that the research-led practice, which I tried to lead the practitioners through my research, and they would never have come to the Caribbean if it weren't for my research. But having gone there and having produced this engagement and the film, the practice then led my research. So that's what I was trying to point out.
Thank you. And practice-led research is one of these terms where it is sometimes used by differently by different theorists. But then as you raise the very fundamental issue that sometimes your research can be about the creative practice, in this case about the music, and other times it can be actually through the music or from the music being led. And so these are some of the things that are important for people to consider.
John, I just have one thing to add, which is in my second project, the Musicophilia in Mumbai project. I myself, by that time, was a minor practitioner of the music. And so my questions were entirely driven by my own engagement. As a musicophiliac, as a practitioner, what was bothering me? What questions was I asking? Why did I need to find answers to these questions? And therefore, I had to explore that question of musicophilia, which was defining my own subjectivity at that point.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you. And we've got another question here from Edmund Fong. This is from Reina Aikalamu. The question is, I am also quite interested in what kind of difficulties Professor Niranjana encountered at the site of cooperating with practices of film and music. Thank you very much for the wonderful sharing.
Thank you so much for that question. I think these questions are really important in forcing me to reflect again on the process. And it may not all happen today in the few minutes we have, but I will carry your questions, all of you who asked questions today, with me as I try to shape the written output of the next project. I think that the question is about the difficulties. I think the difficulties are paramount. I think first we have the difficulties. You watch some joyous occasions when people are making music together. To get there, we had a lot of unhappiness, a lot of anxiety, a lot of I cannot eat this food. Where are my vegetables? And so on and so forth. I mean, we had really difficult times, especially in the Sat collaboration, where you have like intense differences to overcome in some ways. Yes, so I think the difficulties are not caused by personal interaction, because that's always been very wonderful. Even between the collaborators, they have they have lasting bonds, they have lasting friendships. We are connected on WhatsApp, on WeChat, on whatever, all the time. And people keep sharing things with one another. So, and as a researcher, again, I think, and having put these people together, I do have the responsibility for making sure that things are going smoothly. So if I see something is not working out, I try to find a way of resolving that privately or by talking to one or the other of the people. But I think it's been my great good fortune that in this last effort, and even in the Musicophilia project, there have been no horribly unpleasant moments between the practitioners or between them and me. It's only be to do with externalities, with circumstances, with not finding the right instrument, not getting the tuning right, the mic not working, or some other horrible travel-related stuff. And that's about it. I think we've been very fortunate. We've been lucky. It could have been far worse.
Sure. I would follow up, maybe possibly the final question here. Dawned on me with seeing some of the footage there, whether you had any special considerations about research ethics in getting clearances or permissions for the filming in some of those contexts.
Yeah. So in the Musicophilia instance, what we did was we filmed very extensive interviews, more than an hour long, with each of the practitioners that we talked to. They've signed consent forms that are standard consent forms in the music industry, and I was aided by a very senior musician who's also a researcher in India, and he shared a draft consent form with me. He said, just take everyone's consent in writing. It's better that way later if you're going to use it. So very often I've done that, especially when they're from the non-English background. It helps to just have that in place. Those interviews are freely available to the public on a website, pad.ma. I can share the link with you later. And all those interviews don't necessarily feature in the film. So for the film, we didn't need to have any special ethics clearances. And when you want to film in a space in Mumbai, no one is going to ask you where is your ethics clearance. We occupy a very different research terrain in India, so that's not really a matter of concern. People are happy if they're, especially when their practice is languishing, to have other people watch it, view it, listen to it. So they're very, very happy to contribute. They're not trying to protect their privacy. They really want it to be out there. They're all performers. So this is a strange question to ask. It's not about data privacy at all.
Okay.
And that's where the whole ethics thing comes in, I find, right? The formality of it. But we have written consent from most people. If we didn't get written consent, we would ask them as we were speaking to them to just speak it out and record it. And we just have that
Thank you.
For purposes. And very often when I wrote up something and used an interview, I would, and if the person was an English speaking person, I would send it to them and say, is this okay how I've represented you? And I've never had it.
Thank you. So I think at that we're probably ready to wrap up, and I'm going to turn it back over to Dean Yurt, who will offer us a final word. But I want to thank you myself and thank everyone for your questions. It's been delightful, and I will now turn it over back to Dean Yurt. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. Teju, Professor Niranjana, we've spent a couple of hours together. This was incredibly rich and fruitful, and you've talked about taking our questions with you, but we will certainly also take your reflections and also your provocations and encouragements. All of those things will be things that we will think about and talk about here in the faculty, and no doubt also in the departments. So thank you so much for being with us. I can't imagine a better way for us to start this series, Teju. And I really appreciate also that you're promising to share some further materials with us. We'll make sure that if you do send us links or other things, that the people who have joined us here today receive your message. So this, I hope that this is the beginning of networking here, in Hong Kong across the universities, and also it was just fantastic that you were able to bring the performers into this space as well. That just brought such richness to the whole experience. So thank you so much. I think that's it, Teju. Thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you. Thanks to you and to John Winsenberg and John Ernie, who's kindly come here as well. And to all of you, other colleagues at Baptist, other friends from across the globe, my wonderful collaborators in India. I think that it's been a really good experience. I said, oh God, what am I going to say? Practice as research, what do I even do that? Am I a practitioner? Yes, no, whatever. But I think this has been a great occasion and a very provocative a provocation you offered me that has allowed me to, I think differently about this material and even put it together in this way, which I've never done before.
Fantastic.
So thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Teju.
I hope to meet in better times.
Yes. And thank you to everybody who has joined us today. Lovely to have you with us and for your questions. Bye.